Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. Welcome back to the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm your host, Jameson Cable, and we have another special guest here, J.R. Van Hoos. How you doing, buddy?
Good, man. Everything's going well.
I guess I should say back again. This is probably the third time I believe that we've had you come on.
Hey, man, listen, I enjoy being on here, so it's always a pleasure.
And this topic though is different. This is probably the first time we've kind of veered away from 1800, 1850, 1900. We are actually moving into a sports direction. We're going to talk about the legend of Carr Creek, or the legacy of Carr Creek, or kind of, I guess what has become a legend to say. Of course, all based on truth and fact, but they're kind of would you say the gold standard here in Eastern Kentucky basketball, or what would you describe it?
Listen, Carr Creek, I would say Carr Creek is probably a standard setter as far as what it has done for basketball in Eastern Kentucky. And I'm sure we'll talk about it, but, they're a small school, I think, in 1928 that only had 18 boys in the whole school, makes it to the state championship game. They get beat in like 4 overtimes by Ashland or whatever it was. And then they get invited to the National High School basketball tournament that year, where they do very well. And even Will Rogers, writes stories about them and becomes one of their fans. And I think it was at that point, I think that 1928 team, as people learned about them, no gym, so they played and practiced outside, and no uniforms and all that kind of thing. I think that really got a lot of young people playing basketball in Eastern Kentucky. Because they showed that you could go to Lexington, compete, possibly win a state championship. You can play on the national level, and so I think that's really what began this great movement. From the 20s, especially through the 1950s of Eastern Kentucky basketball.
Yeah, I would agree with that totally, because this is kind of before UK basketball, it becomes a national, powerhouse or well known, I guess you could say it that
Hmm.
way. But it really was kind of the establishment of definitely high school basketball in Eastern Kentucky, which kind of still thrives today and it is a very big deal. I've been to many basketball games in Eastern Kentucky, and people are passionate about it. Very passionate.
Yeah, and like I said, I think it was that. Of course, teams were playing basketball at that time, but as
Mhm.
far as success and being able to think that you could compete with bigger cities and especially Central Kentucky teams, that was that 1928 team. I think was really what got everything started for Eastern Kentucky. I mean, it was the beginning of legendary teams, coaches, players that came out of the area. And like you said, before UK basketball became big, and of course we're talking about days before television, and all you had to do was turn on the TV and watch Kentucky. Most people were going to their local high school basketball games, and so I think this was what really got people interested, especially in Eastern Kentucky, interested in basketball, because these players, those young players from that 1928 team, especially, showed that they could play with anybody across the country, especially with what they did in the national tournament that year. And
But
like I said, being a part of that history, myself, Mr. Basketball, state champion, all that, I really have to go back to that 1928 Carr Creek team and really think that this is where that the legacy of everybody that came before myself and came after, especially out of Eastern Kentucky, this is where it came from. This 1928 Carr Creek team. I think this is really what got basketball uh, a jump start, essentially in Eastern Kentucky, and it just it took off quickly. It definitely took off quickly
mhm.
from that 1928 team. And I know we're going to talk about the 1956 Carr Creek team as well, but man, in between that, I mean, you had fantastic teams from Inez. Shoot, they
Mhm.
won two state championships in 41 and 54. And players you could talk about all day: King Kelly Coleman and Johnny Cox from Hazard, and all these legendary players that came out of Eastern Kentucky. I really think you have to look back at that 1928 Carr Creek team and think, hey,
Got it started.
this is where it started. This is what encouraged young kids to really work hard and play basketball, and you got to think about the coal mining industry at the time, and a lot of kids were probably not wanting to go into the mines, and so this was a lot of people's only shot to get out of here and
Mhm.
go to college, make a life for themselves, and it started with a basketball.
Yeah, yeah. And now to kind of explain this as well. So back in these days, the national high school basketball tournament and stuff. That does anything like that exist now? That really doesn't happen
No,
now.
there's nothing like that. But see, at the time, what they did, they would invite the best teams across the country. Not necessarily your state champions, but in 1928,
Hmm.
Ashland was our state champion, so they got invited. And Carr Creek had won over so many fans in Lexington that they got invited as well. And like I said, can you imagine these kids from Eastern Kentucky who would, for the most part, had probably never been to Lexington in their life, now getting to go to Chicago, a huge city, which they probably only ever read about,
Yeah.
and now they're playing against teams from Georgia and, I can't remember who else they played, but, these teams from across the country. And how special it would have been for them to know that they're winning these games against some of these best teams from across the country. And here they are, from a little tiny mountain school with just, you know, they know everybody in the school,
Yeah.
and now they're going to these places where there's thousands of people cramming in to watch them play basketball. I mean, it must have been a special experience for sure.
Yeah, unreal, and probably, or I guess dreams coming true for them.
Yeah.
Really, really impressive. Now, so Carr Creek got started. It was just like I guess would you call it a community center at first? They didn't even have a high school at first. I believe it started with elementary, and then they built up that to that. Um,
Yeah, I believe
to,
you're right. I don't really know much about the history of the school and how it got
Mhm.
started, but I'm sure it was like most mountain communities, small mountain communities. You know, these
Mhm.
people came together to start a school for the local children, uh,
Mhm.
and then it just kind of grew from there. And
Well,
and I don't think it ever essentially got very big, student
mhm.
population wise, but man, they had some great basketball teams coming out of there. I'll
Well,
tell you that.
yeah, that's one of the interesting facts about it is it started out. I think there was two ladies, and I don't remember what their names were off the top of my head, but they came together, like you said, formed a school. It started out as an elementary school and then developed over time. They added high school and so forth. And the high school, I mean, it was literally like only a few years that they had a high school there that in 1928, and then they went to um, the state championship. But the thing is, too, that makes the legacy even more kind of, I guess, compelling and interesting is, in 1970, I believe, maybe 1972, the school closed. Like the high school closed. There is still a Carr Creek Elementary School,
Hmm.
but that's it. That's all that's kind of left. Like you said, the gym is still operational.
Yeah, the gym and I think the old high school building. It's just. I mean, when you look at it, it's an old stone building. Uh, Definitely not very big with the gymnasium attached to it. Uh, but yeah, I mean, when you look at those old school buildings, and especially when you know the basketball history part of it, I mean, it's amazing when you think, man, all this history came out of a community that was very small. Uh,
Mhm.
and I mean, when you go to the school, it's really something special because it sits on a mountainside. I mean, it overlooks what is now a lake. The lake didn't used to be there. Uh,
Yeah.
but I mean, when you look at it, you're like, I can't believe that a school this small achieved some of the things that they did,
Mhm.
and it kind of puts it into perspective for you, really, when you see it in person and you walk in the gym and you get a sense of all of that history, that is essentially around you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, and so like with Carr Creek, I guess like we said, it was established in the 1920s, and then I mean, literally 8 years later, they go to the high school state championship. But the students there began playing basketball pretty much immediately. But like I said earlier, they didn't have court. They pretty much played outside in the dirt or in the mud or whatever the weather elements were.
Hmm.
I think too. I remember reading that if that like you said, they were on the side of a mountain, and if you missed one of the shots, it would go down the mountain, and so that was a very big
Listen, I've been there.
encouragement.
I've been there, man. I mean, uh, not only have I literally been to Carr Creek, but my high school basketball coach, he actually lives on the side of a mountain, right? So
Uh-huh.
he lives in Paintsville, but I mean, we have mountains right here in town, and so we would always go up to his house because in his driveway he had a basketball goal. It was like 8 feet tall, so you could dunk on it, right? I mean, we
Yeah,
11, 12 years old playing dunk ball. Well, his driveway wasn't very big. I mean, it's probably 15 feet wide, and then it dropped off the mountain, so you'd have to walk up to play, right? But we always had this rule: if you were the last one to touch the ball and it went over the side of the hill, you went to get it. So, I mean, and you would wait. I mean, you would wait 15 to 20 minutes for
it's
the
really
ball to come back, and then you'd start playing again. So you wanted to try to save it, but you knew when you got close, you had to hold up because you didn't want to run over the side of the mountain either.
yeah. Take care of the ball. Take care
That's
of the
right,
ball.
man. Yeah, hey, you learned how to take care of it, right? You made good passes. You made good passes. So, yeah, I've been there. I've been there too. But yeah, I've heard those stories at Carr Creek. Ball goes over
Yeah,
the mountain. You had to wait a little bit for somebody to bring it back up.
yeah. Now to make it even like kind of crazier, at the beginning they had a welder make their hoops out of old wagon wheels for the basketball goals. The community actually saved up to get them a real basketball to play. Um, but I don't know how much that would have been in 1920, but still. you could tell there's a big passion and a big push for basketball at the time, or just in those times. Um, no uniforms, and uh, the social studies teacher was their coach, I believe, and they also rode their horses to games, which they never had any home games because they
Right.
didn't have
Yeah.
a
Because they didn't have a
gymnasium.
gym. Yeah. 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 I mean, when you, and when, and I'm sure when people read those stories, they're like, that can't be true. But yeah, I mean, Eastern
Yeah,
Kentucky, pretty isolated, especially communities deep in the mountains, isolated from other communities. And so, you really had to scrimp and save and do everything you could to just buy the necessities. Like you said, somebody was making homemade rims. The community
yeah.
saved up to buy a basketball, which I'm sure they cherish. Like, hey, we can't,
We
we can't tear up this basketball, right? It's the only one we've got. Um, and people always, I think, take transportation for granted. Um,
yeah,
you know, Eastern Kentucky, you have to think, especially in the 1920s, there's not a very good road system, and,
yeah.
and the roads that did exist, mostly not paved, so dirt, gravel, if they were good gravel. And even around here in Paintsville, I know of people that I've talked to saying, sometimes when the creek water was low, people would drive in the creek beds. They would use that
Wow.
as a
Yeah.
road for for some distance. And so you can imagine when weather is bad, especially when it snows, rains, roads become impassable. It's hard to travel. And so, yeah, horseback. I mean, that's probably easiest mode of transportation that some of these people could achieve. And most people had their own horses or donkeys or whatever they used on their small farms in Eastern Kentucky, their small homesteads. And so, yeah, I mean, when people read about that, they probably like there's no way. But yeah, that's how people were living at the time, and so they were doing their best to get by.
Yeah, yeah. And we probably should have kind of give a little more geography. Knott County is where Carr Creek is in. Does Johnson touch Knott County?
No, Knott
I
County
think
is bordered
there's
by Floyd
Perry.
County. Yeah,
Yeah,
Floyd County on the east side,
east.
and then Johnson County. Yeah,
Okay, yeah. And
yeah.
then Perry County is next to
And
Knott
then to the
County.
west, yeah, Perry County, and then to the south, you have Letcher
Mhm,
County. So,
mhm.
yeah, I mean,
And
and when you go to Carr Creek, it's in the southern part of Knott County, so it is deep in the mountains.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
and even today, it's. I mean, it's not really easy to get to. I mean, there's some curvy roads you got to go on.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
it's still a good way to travel to get there.
Yeah, and even like whenever I'm thinking of like whenever I go to Eastern Kentucky, going to Hindman or Hazard or wherever it may be, Pikeville even, there's a pretty straight road. No, I mean, well, I say pretty straight, but a road that's easy to
Fairly
travel.
straight. We'll say
Fairly,
fairly straight for the most part.
yeah, that you can get there easily. And people might say, well, those places are hard to get to, but not really. You can get to Hazard pretty much. Get on 75, go south, get off at London, and you're going to get to Hazard and then Pikeville fairly easily. But then you get off into say like if I was to say, hey, let's go to Buckhorn in Perry County. That's another good drive. It's a 45-minute
Oh
drive
yeah,
from Hazard,
yeah. I've
and
been to Buckhorn a few times, man. That's a. I
yeah,
mean, you literally go over 3 mountains to get to
yeah.
Buckhorn. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So the same deal. Like you think of like, well, these places you can get to them. It's not impossible or anything like that. But it's another branch off of a branch to get there. And
yeah. I mean, and like you said, people still like, that's kind of that's a hard place to get to, and so I mean, you have to think 100 years ago, yeah, it was a really hard place to get to. I mean, when most of your means of transportation, especially in East Kentucky, was by rail. People used railroads to travel from Painesville to Pikeville. That was the
mhm,
easiest way to travel. Yeah,
yeah,
some of these other places that communities and schools existed, they were very very hard to get to.
yeah, yeah. Well, I guess hopefully that kind of sets the stage for some geography. People understand kind of where we're talking about. Um, Eastern Kentucky, southeastern, I would even say that if you want to be, I guess, try to be as specific as possible. But the interesting thing too about the Carr Creek, they play in the state championship in 1928. But then who did they beat to get to the state
Ashland
championship?
beat them in the finals that year.
Mhm.
And Ashland was really good in 1928. They had
And they
a guy named Ellis Johnson.
mhm.
I mean, he was an All-American at Kentucky. And I know a lot about Ellis Johnson. You know, he was the basketball coach at Moorhead for a while, and then he was the basketball coach at Marshall for a while.
Okay.
And so, I mean, a pretty well-known name, especially in eastern Kentucky, Ashland, Moorhead, Huntington, but also well-known in Lexington as well, being an All-American in basketball. And so, you know,
Go ahead.
having, you know, with Carr Creek, you know, taking the Ashland team to 4 overtimes, I believe was what it was in 1928.
Yeah.
I mean, that just shows you the quality of the basketball players that were coming out of Carr Creek. You know, I mean, you've got this very well known and well established basketball player in Ashland. I believe he actually went in the national tournament. I think which Ashland won the national championship that year too. I think he made the all tournament team, so he was one of the top players, high school players in the country. And so, I mean, for Carr Creek to even compete with Ashland that year was unbelievable.
Pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Now, and did they beat Hazard to go to the state championship that year? Because I'm getting a little bit ahead, but Morton Combs, the coach
Yep.
for the
Now the coach in 1956, Morton Combs, he was on the Hazard team that won the state title in 1932.
that's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm not sure who Carr Creek beat in the region that year, but I don't think Morton Combs was in high school yet in 1928. He might have been as a younger kid on one of the Hazard teams, but I'm not sure. But I do know that he actually hit the game-winning shot to beat Louisville Male in the 1932 state championship game. Yeah.
Wow. Pretty cool. And now before we go off the 1928 team, the score for the Ashland game was a romping 14-11. Was it?
It was something. Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was real. I mean, you would think, you know, when you see it went into so many overtimes, you're like, but the score is. But yeah, it was really low. It was a really low scoring game, very low scoring game.
Yeah. But different times.
It was a defensive game. I'll call it a defensive game. That's what we'll say. It was a defensive game.
Yeah, sounds like a modern NFL defensive game.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, and I will definitely have to defer to you for any basketball strategical or strategies that were being implemented.
I don't know if it was as much strategy. I know, you know, some of the rules at the time, you know, old ball rules are pretty archaic, you know, after.
Yeah.
And I believe in 1928 they were still playing by this rule. After every made basket, there was a jump ball, you know, like they have a jump ball to start the game.
Yeah.
You know, so like when either team scored, the refs got the ball out of the basket, and then you had another jump ball. So if you had a tall player, you could control the game. You know, if he could get every jump ball, you didn't have to. You didn't have to worry about trying to score quickly. You could hold it as long as you wanted to. You know? And some of the rules, especially back then, I'm like, man, how did they even? You know, how did basketball succeed? Because I mean, it must have just been you're like, oh my! I mean, this takes forever. You know,
was there no? Oh, my green screen's falling down. Wasn't there no half court? There was no half court clock or violation. Was that?
Oh yeah, I mean there was there was. I don't think there was like a 10-second count. You didn't. You had as much time you wanted to bring the ball up the floor, and I mean, you know, of course, rules were put in place to speed up the game, and so, I mean, you watch a basketball game today. I mean, it's unbelievable how quick they get up and down the floor. But you know, especially in early, you know, the 1920s, basketball was fairly new to Eastern Kentucky. You know, it was starting to be played by a lot of schools in the 1920s, and so these rules, I mean, it was a sign of the times. You know, people they weren't used to the game, and so eventually it did speed up.
Yeah, Yeah. So yeah, that's pretty interesting. It's kind of it's crazy how it kind of developed and how things basketball changed, but even for Eastern Kentucky, how it went as well. Um, so like Carr Creek makes it to the state championship in 28. Now does that team gets invited to the national
Hmm.
tournament
I think,
that
and I
year as
think,
well?
and I want to say they finished in third place, maybe third or
Hmm.
fourth
Hmm.
place, and Ashland won the tournament. So,
Yeah,
you've got these two teams from Kentucky that are in the top
three.
four, top three.
Yeah.
Uh,
I'm pretty sure, like, because I think they had a third place game, which is something a lot of places don't
yeah,
have.
you,
I
yeah.
think in soccer, they still have like third place games. Um, but yeah, they had a third place game and they won that one. Um, but it's still pretty interesting that they established themselves so quickly and had so much success at such a small school and an early age of
Yeah, and
development.
we at the beginning we were talking about that legacy, and I think what you see from that Carr Creek team in 28, especially, is this legacy of small schools from Eastern Kentucky doing well and going down to play in the state tournaments here in Kentucky. I mean, you have a pretty long legacy of pretty famous small schools that have done well in the state tournament, and I think it was because of Carr Creek in
Yeah,
1928. I mean,
yeah,
there and there's not a even today there's not a lot of big schools, big enrollment schools in Eastern Kentucky, and so I think when small schools go to the state tournament, and when I played in the '90s with Paintsville, people tend to back those small schools because of I think the other similar small schools that have come out of the area before.
yeah,
People enjoy
yeah.
watching those small schools play, and they cheer them on in the hopes that they're going to win a state championship.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and not to label them as underdogs, but in some most cases they probably are considered to be an underdog. Um, but people like the underdog story. Um,
People love the underdogs, and I learned firsthand people like those small schools that come out of Eastern Kentucky.
yeah,
Just whenever their team gets beat, it seems they jump on that bandwagon. They cheer for that. They cheer for that small school when they don't have anybody else to cheer for, and it's pretty special.
yeah, yeah. There goes my green screen again. We're trying. I'll
That's all right.
I need to do something better than Scotch tape.
It's like the it's
So
like
yeah.
the post it's like the posters in my classroom. They fall off the wall all the time because I have Scotch tape on them.
Yeah, yeah. So like I guess I guess I want to call it a dynasty in the sense that they're very good. They're a well known program. They're kind of established and continue on even after the state championship game. Um, but the region. So when we look at high school basketball, there's 14 regions, correct?
16. There's 16.
16
Mm-hmm.
regions. Um, and now Carr Creek would have fallen into the 14th.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, Carr
And
Creek's a 14th region. Yeah.
who is in the 14th region now?
Today in the
Yeah.
14th region, well, Knott County Central is
Well,
what Carr
let,
Creek
yeah, let me
essentially
say it
had.
this way. Geographically, like, just the counties. You don't have to name every.
Oh, okay. 14th. That would be Breathitt County,
Mhm,
Knott County, Perry County, which would be Hazard and Perry County
mhm.
Central. Um, Trying to think who else is in the fort. Letcher County is in the 14th region. So you have it's kind of that little geographic area right through
Yeah.
there. And then bordering Knott County, which I said earlier was Floyd County, and Floyd County is in the 15th region
Mhm.
basketball wise. So that would be Floyd, Johnson, Pike County, Martin County, Lawrence County. And then the 16th region, the last one would be Ashland, Boyd County, Carter County, Greenup County,
Kind of
those areas. And
the
yeah,
northeastern.
northeastern, yeah, Kentucky. Yeah.
If you want to think of it, you got a northeastern region, central
and,
eastern region.
and so what they do, they number them. It starts in Western Kentucky. So far, Western Kentucky is the first region, and then it comes eastward. So
We're going to stop right there. And again, I want to thank JR for coming on the show, talking about the legend of Carr Creek, or the legacy of Carr Creek. We are going to have another episode next week talking a bit more about it. The Kentucky High School basketball tournament actually begins here in the next week or two, I believe. So go check it out if you're interested. And that's all for today. And thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/KYHistoryPod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in Western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. We're always seeking to find more Kentucky history so we can bring it to you. The viewers, the listeners, we want all the stories and all the events from Kentucky's great history to be told and shared everywhere.